Hey, all right, cool. Looks like we got something going on here. All right, I got to figure out what the settings are for this. Something went goofy. I don't know if there was an update recently or what the deal is, but for whatever reason, there's a disconnect between my streaming software OBS and YouTube here. So it's kind of watching this, keeping an eye on things on the side here. It's very get that infinite screen effect going on. Anyway, hey, my name's Chris Berzicki. I'm an assistant professor of English and Humanities here at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. And today we are talking a little bit, we're taking a slight deviation from things. Normally, this Together We Write stream is dedicated to tackling any sort, mostly professional, technical, and otherwise pretty straightforward topics when it comes to writing and document design. And the hot topic, as many of you know, especially if you know me, you've taken one of my classes, you know that generative AI has been the hot topic for a while now, and that hasn't changed. It's only although it seems to have be getting a lot less exposure in the news. That doesn't mean it's not happening. I was recently at a conference when there were other people from higher ed, but also professionals who really are leaning into AI and Chat GPT, Microsoft Copilot, Google Bard, a lot more. Just looking in manufacturing was just looking at an example. There are outfits that are helping organizations and enterprises put together their own AI, and so there's a lot of movement here, and I think we're past the point of that initial sort of shock and awe stage, and it's sort of subdued a little bit more. And one of the concerns that I have as an instructor is I feel it's one of my responsibilities is to sort of stay on top of things, thinking about, okay, who's our incoming freshmen, and also what do they have to look for when when they graduate in 4 or 5 years or whatever. And so as my approach to AI, and all of this is to preface any sort of discussion I have about AI. I preface this with my own perspective of it as an inevitability, and this is not a defeatist attitude, because I think there are certain things, innovations, developments, especially when it comes to writing, creative practice, any sort of artistic work or practice. There is a tendency to find ways, unfortunately, for industry to find a way to not pay someone to do it, right? That's been my experience for as long as I've been, a working person who has worked in fields where I've either done visual design or writing. That has always been the case. Now, when it comes, not so much with visual arts. Though I think we are there when it comes to like Mid-Journey. I think that there are ways, but when we had the introduction, when we moved from design using ink and pencil and layouts, boards with tape and glue and wax and all sorts of sticky things, attaching parts to different parts. And, there was a lot of it. And it took a while. It took a surprising long time for us to start getting to like InDesign and PageMaker and desktop publishing. And it was strange because I had my first encounter with desktop publishing was in grade school. And I don't know how the school I went to had access to, I don't remember what it was called. It wasn't desktop publisher, but it was something else. Anyway, so here we are with writing. And there are a select few people out there in the world who really value writing as a creative practice. And very few people have access to that training, to be honest, right? I am very fortunate to be one of those people. If you're watching this, chances are you are as well. And so I preface a lot of this by saying, although these are tools that we may be skeptical, healthily skeptical and cynical of, I think we all also should be knowledgeable about their use and their practice, so that even if a client wants to utilize that, or an employer or colleague or whatever, we come into these situations where it becomes a skill that's necessary to continue to work. I believe that these are skills that are necessary. Going forward, you should have some sort of idea. Can you survive without these tools? Absolutely, of course. In an ideal situation, we would value human writing over robot writing. And the point of this stream is never to really get into criticism or critique, but I do think it's important to be thinking about some of these issues. Like, for example, what we're doing today is really thinking about how to use this in more creative ways. ChatGPT, I've done other streams, other videos where we talk about, how do we write a memo? How do we write a cover letter? Those are pretty easy to do once you start to plug in the information. But really, I want to think about these tools as doing something that we had not, something more procedural, something more algorithmically generated. And in the past, so for example, we have a couple of different examples, and I've tucked away most of my books. Going back to, we have no shortage of, this is certainly not original, but if we go back to, say, the Aleppo movement from, I don't remember dates, it's been a while, I told myself I really need to go back into this and find some of this information. So you're talking about the 1960s. So 85 years ago, looking at creative practice, really questioning this sort of notion that, to be a poet, you had to be inspired, and that there was some sort of revelatory process, and there were all sorts of other philosophies that were going into this movement. But really, I don't remember what Aleppo. It's French, but really thinking about potential literature, right? And it basically, what it is adding more constraint to the writing process. So, like, when you start adding more and more and more constraints, what sort of patterns come up? What sort of weird, strange things does text and language, what is produced? And so it really is this weird mix of math and language. And it's something I don't see often. I always thought it was kind of cool. As someone who is not a trained creative writer, I've always been admirable of those who are creative writers. It's not a skill that I am willing to, what little I've ever done, I'm not willing to share it, because it's bad. I know it's bad. But what I do like, and what I do have access to, is a little bit more basic programming. I'm not very good at that either, but really thinking about marrying those two things, saying, okay, what kind of cool things can we do? And so we're really talking about experimenting. And And what I love about this is my first encounter with this was as an editor and editing where do I have a copy of it somewhere? Editing our, this was Cream City Review published out of UW Milwaukee. And as what was my little title at the time? I don't remember. Production manager. And my job essentially was to lay out all of the content into an InDesign file. And I would get things work like this that really broke a lot of the, versus very straightforward, you know, flow of text on a page that I could anticipate. And I'm trying to go back to that example, what would end up being a part of the process was really trying to understand not what the writer was thinking, but what the tool they were using was doing. So replicating tabs, replicating certain tweaks and functions of their, like, say, Microsoft Word. What sort of settings did they have that I could mimic that? And the more often I did that, the more I started thinking about the reliance on those tools and how, in some cases, to be honest, the novelty of a work rested more in the usage of the tool than the content itself, right? That was from my point of view and only mine. So I mean, it was published for other reasons, but as the editor who was struggling to try to put this, I mean, let's picture this, 2, 3 in the morning, struggling to put out the file, get that sent to the printer in time for it to make the deadline, and you're trying to figure out what the heck is this person, what were they doing? There's lines that are all over the place. I'm not sure how they accomplish this spacing, and trying to do that because you want to ultimately replicate exactly what the creator's vision was, right? And so that's where this comes from. And so I really am down with these tools like ChatGPT and Google Bard and Microsoft Copilot, though that seems to be more of a businessy type thing. And really looking at these as creative tools that can help us do some interesting things if we apply some of these practices. So today, and I know I just went on a little bit of a rant there, but really thinking, okay, how can I explore these tools, maybe not with the goal, the intention of producing a aesthetically pleasing poem or short story, but really almost breaking these tools and really trying to think, okay, how can I push these? Because really what ChatGPT does, and now we start to refocus here, sorry. What ChatGPT does in these, generative AI, all they're doing is replicating well-worn patterns of the English language or whatever language they're using, although I can't speak to any other language but English. And really saying, for example, if I were to go, and we see this in like emails and that autocomplete, it's doing kind of an extension of that, to whom it may concern. Once upon a time, right? We have the ability to anticipate word patterns, words, syntax, and certain structures because we're well versed in these. We're trained in how to write. We know what to anticipate. ChatGPT is doing the same thing, although it's doing so from looking at millions of documents, right? Blog posts, legal briefs, patents, all of these, any sort of piece of writing that they could get their hands on when they put these tools together. They're really looking at, okay, how, and through that, these tools have a simulated mastery. And I say simulated because they don't really have a mastery. They're just saying, okay, based on so many years of writing, we can, these tools can guess what you want based on inputs. So what we're talking about today is really thinking about the inputs that we're adding in there. We're going to do some basic prompt engineering, but really thinking about, okay, how can we complicate some of these things and make cool stuff out of them? And it's just to see. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe something will happen. I don't know. Monday, by the way, I tried doing this earlier, and for whatever reason, I was running into those issues, and nothing ever was broadcast. So, yeah, we're trying this again. So we got, let's see what we got. ChatGPT. This is 4.0. Pony up $20 a month to get the paid version. I only do this every once in a while, just if I have something that if I'm using it a lot for presentations or any sort of usage. But yeah, we gotta gonna try this here. So let's say, I'll give you an example of what not to do. A poem about. All right, so I ask it a poem, right? It to write a poem. This is what we call a zero-shot prompt. Um, Essentially, what a zero-shot prompt is your most basic, fundamental form of prompt where you're asking the tool a question and it produces you an answer. So it's fairly straightforward. This is the simplest and probably the most, I would say, unsophisticated, but because it really is not doing a whole lot of work, not really the potential that we're looking for. So let's see if I can pull up some information I have on the side here. Make sure I have my facts straight. So now few shot prompts are where you're sort of extending this by adding classifications. The connection is you're still using the large language model, so that big, massive pile of documents that help these tools predict what the intended response is. They're still relying on that, so we're not adding any sort of information necessarily. We're not even training the not even doing any sort of good quality training. If anything else, we're training that big model, and it just sort of becomes one of millions of thumbs up or thumbs down from users. When we start to really get into the potential is when we add our own sort of parameters, add our own content that is used, and it becomes the preference, right? So we're talking about training. I mean, if you hear that word, you really are training it to do what you want. So few shot prompts, similar to zero shot, you're still using that same knowledge, but you can also add parameters like examples or other data sets. So it's this weird way of adding one more layer to help constrain things. So if I say, write a revise, but using a see if that works. 14 lines. So what I've done now is rather than just saying poem, which is very generic, now it's going to say, okay, now what do I know about a sonnet based on the history of sonnet composition? Sonneting, is that a thing? I'm going to say, okay, a sonnet typically consists of 14 lines with a specific rhyme scheme, often A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, and employs iambic pentameter. I remember those from taking a Shakespeare class many moons ago. Here is a revised version of the poem in sonnet form. So now, here's where we start to get into the problems, by the way, of these tools. It knows what it needs to, and we'll see this in some experimentation later on. It knows exactly, okay, I know what the definition of a sonnet is. I know I can apply these parameters to creating this poem. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I've got the A B A B C D C D, and then we've got the two lines at the end. In circuits code, my essence lies confined. With algorithms crisp, I strive to aid. From simple facts to queries more designed, I calculate how best each task displayed. Sounds pretty good to me so far. That's not bad. All right. So, and that's a fairly straightforward approach because, we have, if I were to do again, but as a haiku, 575. In code, I assist questions big to trivial. Chat GPT exists. And here's where we get to some fun, funky quirks about these tools. They, for whatever reason, can't count. In code, I assist. Good. Questions big to trivial. Good. Chat GPT exists. That's 6. So not quite. Unless I'm supposed to say chat gibbet. Whatever. So you get these weird little things. And the list goes on and on, right? You don't use these tools for research. They're terrible with humor, terrible with nuance. But really when it comes, really good at other things though. So, all right. So let's try, go back to the first poem. I think that's going back to, right? So yeah, now what I'm doing here again is training it. Now, I think one of the, I won't even say it's a misconception, but we forget computers are dumb. They're very stupid machines that are only as good as the information that we give them, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So we're really looking for, you want to make sure that the information that you have in there is going to help you get the results that you're looking for. So again, this is why that few shot prompts, was you start to give parameters, you start, rather than asking for poems, asking for specific poems, rather than asking for a memo, asking for a memo written objectively, professionally. And again, you're still using that data set. You're not giving it any original information, but it does, adding those parameters does help. And that's what we call few shot prompts. All right. Next, we have knowledge generation prompting, which is really going to be the focus of this, I think, for the rest of the hour, because this is where we start to get into some fun areas. And what we're really doing here is thinking about, okay, now you're starting to work with the information that you're given and starting to add more original parameters, more original writing, and really starting to utilize the power of generative AI on original work, right? And again, I think this is valuable because it helps us remember that these are tools and they're very powerful tools. These were things that have, in my lifetime, they've really only been available to those working in certain departments at certain universities. So this is, you have an incredible potential for text analysis, data analysis, and so how do we apply these and how do we use them to create something that is fairly interesting that can tell us certain things? So let's try. Now, revise this poem It follows the following structure. The first line is 1 character in length. With each subsequent line, increase the length by 1 character. Do this until you write a line that is 20 characters long. At that point, reduce the each line should then be reduced by 1 character until you reach 1. So what I'm trying to do here is essentially a copy of where is it again? I can't remember the author's name, but a work of concrete poetry. So we've got a liminal poem by Martin Gardner, here again in this Aleppo book. And it is more of a, what we also call like concrete poetry, which is more visual in form. Like the language forms a certain visual composition that may or may not have something to do with the poem itself, right? So this is what I'm trying to do, is mimic this subject, this approach. Let's see what it does. When it takes a long time to process, that means I feel better. Yeah. Starting to. So I can clearly see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the numbers are a little bit wonky. Clearly, we get into a little bit of, but it's got the structure. It looks almost right, but this is clearly like 3. I hope this diamond-shaped poem meets the structural constraints you've set. Would you like to explore or anything else? All right. So that's something. So let's go back to the original poem. Okay. So one of the things that I try to remember is, but often forget, is that as you're building, keep that in mind, that conversation is maintained. So as you are adding prompts and it's producing responses, it's helpful to remind it to go back. So if I don't want to continue working with this, I have to ask it to go back. Maybe there's an easier way to do that, much more sophisticated way other than go back to the original poem, but that's the only way I have thought about that. All right, so now let's try another. I think this is the N+7 method, which I have not had success with yet. But here is one where we replace certain words with, say, the 7th word after it in the dictionary. So let's see. Revise this poem so that every contraction is replaced by an by the name of an animal, but using the name of an animal that begins with the same letter. Maintain the contraction form. So what I'm trying to do here, because I see this, I just saw this let's. So if it'll work if it replaces let's with, say, lions. Well, is that the only one? Maybe. We'll see. In circuits and in code I dwell. So it didn't, that might be, I thought, each contraction? Isn't that what that's called? Let us? That's a contraction, right? So what it's doing is code dingo. In circuits and in Cobra I dwell, a digital domain. In dingo well, with algorithms sharp and neat, I strive. Whoa. I broke it. Yes. Network error. Oh. Let's see. Well, it's going to do it again. Let's see what happens. Oh, we now got different, it's not even starting to. It didn't even do the let's. Let's see. Try it again. Go back to original poem. Okay. Are you familiar with? Okay, so here we go. What is the n plus 7 method of Olippo? So, okay, here we go. The n plus 7 method involves taking every noun in a text and replacing it with the noun that appears 7 entries later in a chosen dictionary. So this is, again, now it's got the poem. It created that. Now it's taking our another question I ask, and it's going to put these two together. Now, it in the past, what I've tried to do was just say, use the now for every noun, select the 7th noun after it, and what it was giving me was, well, I don't know which dictionary you're referring to. So let's say apply the N7 technique to your original poem. Let's see if it works. Hypothetical dictionary. In circuits, and so it's not selecting every noun, only not even not sure what it's interesting to compare. I'm more than just a seaweed machine. Actually, this poem is a lot more interesting than the other one, at least. Let's championship, let's pony and exploit, for that's what I was bullet for. To asparagus, aircraft, and to assist, I am your chat GPT, I existent. All right, so bladder is not uncle. All right. But again, some interesting results. And so you get this there you can start to see the potential when we're thinking about potential literature and how these tools could be used to produce some quirky, broken things. You start to see this. Let's see. Um, again, but replace. Okay, no, go back to original poem, please. Again, let's see. Okay, the following rules. Um, Place nouns with M dashes. Replace verbs with underscores. Replace adjectives with ampersands. Let's see. So this is the stuff I think is, I don't know. I can't certainly won't speak for everyone, but this is the type of stuff that really intrigues me, right? That, and just these sort of, you're adding essentially these algorithms to the right to this writing and just seeing what shakes out. So we've got our apostrophe s, just these weird sort of visual patterns that crop up. And so, for example, when and I wish I could have found the paper that I did once, was like one of the best papers I think I ever wrote as a grad student, was thinking about, it was actually the process of editing and producing this, and thinking about actually working through my frustration of, it was almost like a snot-nosed response to having to figure out Microsoft Word, um, for on the behalf of the author, so that we could publish it the way it was published. And if you, I try to find it again, but we ended up having to publish the darn thing on its side just to get it to fit. And and this is done, in conversation with the author, right? It's not that we don't want to produce something that doesn't look like the intended vision, but we simply could not fit it on the page as written, so we had to turn it on its side. And so the author was given a choice. We could either turn it on its side so it fits, or you'll have to make some sort of changes. And we printed it on its side. So again, working through this, I'm going through like, oh, I wonder if I can. So we're doing, what I was doing is in InDesign, you have, and even in Word, you have that sort of search and replace function, so I can look for certain words and replace them with others. And so I kept messing around with this, but a little bit more sophisticated, we call general expressions, where you are, I believe that's it, general expressions, where you kind of bump that up a little bit. So rather than looking for a word, you start to add wild card characters like an asterisk, and say, okay, I'm going to look for I'm trying to think of what the term is, every clause that begins with this particular word and ends in and please copy and paste the 3-word section, of every sentence statement beginning with this, right? So you get these weird sort of procedurally generated poems, because it would scour the document. And this is while I'm doing this editing, right? So none of the work was original to me. None of it was recognizable as being, something that the author had done. And I certainly didn't publish any of this stuff other than present on it at a conference and say, oh, look what I did. Um, and in that particular conference, it was fairly well received. Not really novel. Most of those people had been doing stuff like this for decades. But for me, it's like, oh, this is kind of cool to think about the relationship between the tool and the craftsman, right? And the craftsperson, thinking about where, the tools help us realize that vision. Is there a point, if it exists, is there a point where the tool becomes more of, gets more agency in that in the creative process than the practitioner themselves? That's sort of the question that's really interesting to me, because it's, if I, as a comparison, one of the other little hobbies I had for a while, and I have some work on this, is that this art, I call it, say, loosely, although if confronted about it, I would be a little bit more confident with this, but the art of screenshotting, video game tourism, exploring different virtual spaces, taking snapshots or screen captures that are aesthetically pleasing, and thinking about that in comparison to, not so much as a comparison to photography, but really what's happening here. Who is, because you have another element, and you think about it, we've got, if I'm walking around, so like lately I've been really digging Yakuza 2, walking around in this virtual city, a Japanese city. I believe it's, yeah, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's breathtakingly beautiful. This is the remake, so it's just amazing to see the detail that the craftsmen put into the backgrounds and just the way that people interact with one another, and it really is something else. And you take a picture, there's a function in there where you can take a picture. Anyway, I know I'm going off tangent here, but, and you start to think about, okay, I'm taking a photo, I'm lining it up, I'm structuring it in a way that is pleasing to the eye. In that sense, that is my creative practice, say, as a photographer. However, these are also spaces that are tightly designed. They're constructed and coordinated to simulate certain spaces. They're not made of flesh and bone and steel and rock, but pixels and bits and all sorts of electricity. On the other hand, if I'm taking a picture at, say, at a park or a city, how different is the virtual city from, say, a state park that's also been designed and constructed to be appealing in certain ways, right? It's just really, you start to think about that relationship between the creative practitioner and the tools that they use. I think, excuse me, and traditionally, when I think of painting, I think of that, the brush, not as um, it's an extension, ideally, even if that extension doesn't extend to, the vision in my head doesn't go through the brush automatically. It takes skill, it takes practice, but the brush doesn't necessarily, although it does, like if the brush is starting to fray and fall apart, that does have an impact. But again, still on this tangent, these questions of that relationship between the artist and the tools that are being used, like there's definitely something that has been extended or compressed, however you look at it, over time. Conventional painting, yes, you're constrained by the borders of the canvas, the brush, the quality of the paints, but and that can extend depending on the materials. It can help extend that vision, but oftentimes the artist is working in tandem with those materials to work with it a certain way to produce a certain effect, right? It's essentially what we're doing here. So, again, apologies for that long uh, uh, diversion there, but I does doing this again does make me think about I can see this. It's easy for me to think about this in terms of the visual arts, but again with writing, is this legible? If I were to read, I don't know if I want to do this. Uh, is there some sort of rhythm here or pattern? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I'm just looking at the M dashes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Is there something there that is of interest? I don't see any underscores though, and I find that hard to believe. Um, anyway, so let's see, where are we at time wise? Okay, we got about 10 minutes left. So again, we're thinking, going back to prompt engineering, this is what we're talking about with knowledge generation. We're pulling in two chunks of information, bringing them into the forefront of our conversation here with ChatGPT, and now we're going to run with it. And again, this is a discrete conversation. We're training this sort of chat bot to do specific functions. And I'm not going to ask it any sort of political questions. It will give me that information, but all it's going to do is prime the pump with more political junk, and that's not what we're after, right? So let's try something else. So that's a little bit of that's knowledge generation. Let's see. Okay. Let's try explain your process. The next basic step is, and this is, again, these start to work in relationship to one another. Once you start to see the functions of each of these prompts, and there's probably dozens by this point. Last time I looked, there was, someone else said like, "Oh, I invented a new way of prompting," and so here we are thinking about. Now we're asking it, because one of the issues with these tools is the sort of black box opacity of what's going on behind the scenes. And one of say, for example, when you do a Google search, if I say, look for UW Green Bay, it's going to give me all sorts of information, a lot of ads, a lot of web pages, maybe a few mentions, some social media feeds, other bits and pieces. What it doesn't tell me is how you got there. And that is actually one of the biggest issues with Google search, is that very few people hold the keys, right? We can guesstimate about how it's doing what. Back in the day, we used to do search engine optimization, and we would put all sorts of buzzwords in our content so that when someone did a Google search, ours would come up because we would have, say, a lot of links and a lot of these sort of keywords that at the time we thought were important. And maybe we've gone back to that. I don't know. But Google search is very much a black box system. Here we have, okay, now I'm asking it, okay, hey, you, ChatGPT, thanks for doing what you just did. Now explain your process. Tell me what you did. This is how we start to get closer to logic, reasoning, understanding, processing information in ways that is most helpful to us. So this is what we call chain of thought prompting. So I just asked, okay, I used a straightforward replacement method. Yep. First rule was to replace all nouns with the poem and M dashes. Nouns serve, okay, da 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 da. Verbs with underscores. Verbs. Let's ponder. And it didn't do that. At least I don't think it did. They all look the same. So it did not actually do that. Erase your poetry, right? So here's another Olippo technique, right? So it's doing a lot of these things. It's identifying, actually, probably because we've already been, throughout this chat, have been discussing these techniques. So again, it's primed with this information. So it's reading the theme. It's saying, okay, based on what you've been, I've got this massive amount of information. Based on what you've asked, I can guess that what you're getting at is some Olippo techniques for creative writing. And so that's what it's focusing on. And this helps us keep things relevant, I guess, discreet. But notice it was not successful. So here, I want to try this. We're just asking it, do a little self-assessment. What do you think? Oh, yeah, see, the success of this exercise depends on the goals set for it. I would love a response from a student like this. Well, and this is, to be honest, what I try to do in the classroom. Oh, my goodness. That's enough. Got, here we go, some ampersands. Let's see. Just kind of curious what it says. Why are there no underscores? There we go. So again, like, and I'm not going to go through this and to see whether it is precise or not. The poem looks different every time it writes it, so I'm not exactly sure. But we do have the underscores. So again, this is part of that training process. And you see this when it comes to research and other. It's laughable how wrong it is, but being aware that, again, garbage in, garbage out. If we're giving it garbage prompts, it's going to produce garbage results. So it does take time to go through to produce some of these. This is always an interesting one, and I'll end on this and then close her up. So one of my other favorite things to do is, or at least not, I would say favorite, but interesting thing is I'm the So ASCII art, mostly like characters. I can't remember what it stands for. I don't know the history of it. But if ever seen, like, emojis are, I think the old school emojis, like the shrug, one of my favorites. You know, um, a representation, visual representation of something made using characters, like keyboard characters. So let's see. This Compose a self-portrait in ASCII. It'll give me something in CSS. That's actually one of the most logical ones I've ever seen. There's a CH, sort of an A, T, GPT. Keeps doing the same thing. Now, again, I'm not asking at this point what an ASCII. That's dang good. Wow, that's impressive. Okay, so it's doing some cascading style sheets. Copy the code. Let's see if I can see what that looks like here. Where are we at? My desktop. There's a reason why I don't expose that side of the screen. There's the code, so it's not gonna. All right, let's see. Using ASCII, create a diagram. Let's see. What would you call those? Visualizing the structure of a stanza. Oh, that's nice. Oh, wow, this color there. Ah, I don't even know what most of these are. Determiner. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, so you have this, yeah, again, using these ASCII characters, which is basically just keyboard characters. It's doing a diagram of the stanza. Um, Preposition, noun, conjunction, preposition, and doesn't seem to, and there's no noun, dwell. So it's missing some things, but you could tweak that. All right. So ASCII, another, let's do one more. Out. That's interesting. So that's essentially what I was getting at before. Again, perhaps because I was prompting it earlier to do something very similar. And I don't even know what its questions was. So there's some interesting things happening here, and it's doing stuff with color, which is kind of cool. Anyway, so prompt engineering. This is how we get some. We start to. We can get at some interesting results, and get away from the practical applications that will certainly be exploited by uh, e- enterprises. Think about I myself included. I would love to be focusing on these tools as ways of, furthering our, having one more form of expression, one more tool to help better understand the world and share our perceptions of it. And I think you know, there's a lot of potential here. This is not something that's not been available. It's been there, but more people now have access to it. So with it would be nice if, oh my goodness, a resurgence of the Aleppo movement. Maybe we start to see more concrete poetry and what we call uncreative writing, a weird term that I'm not going to get into because I haven't reread those works enough to speak to them appropriately. So anyway, it's been a long day. My name is Chris Berzicki. I'm an assistant professor here at University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, trying to do a little bit of creative writing among people who are much more. Again, this is why I'm not a creative writer, because words, I struggle with words, and that's why I have ChatGPT to write poetry for me. Although it's not nearly as good as the people I work with, it is an admirable. I don't even know if I want to call it a skill because it doesn't quite. Do I think these robots are going to replace it? Absolutely not. I will finish this by again emphasizing, and a number of people have heard me say this before, but I firmly believe that these tools are going to bring about a new renaissance for creative practice. I think as the tools improve, as more people have access to them, I think we are going to see more people doing interesting things with them, even if they are nonsensical, you know, weird things like this that don't make a whole lot of sense. They're doing something different, right? And making us think: what is language? What is the relationship between us and our tools, and especially when it comes to creative practice? What is authorship? Okay. What is experience? It really does start to bring up some really cool questions, but also thinking about, people are going to want human crafted works. They're going to want poems. They're going to want paintings. They're going to want work that is, you can see the mistakes, you can see the errors, you can see the hiccups and the wrinkles and all that good stuff that makes creative work so wonderful. Um, so anyway, have a good week, everyone. Next week, I'm not quite sure what we're talking. Maybe we'll go back to more practical matters, but in the meantime, have a good week. And ChatGPT, please come up with a catchy closing phrase for me. Thanks. Bye.